All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jim McCafferty. I am a CrimCon board member. I'm an associate professor of criminal justice at Kennesaw State University outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to CrimCon 2020. This is the 11 a.m. panel on stream number 4 on Friday. The name of the panel is Youth. We have several researchers here that are excited to share their work. And if you are attending and you have any questions you'd like to ask the panelists, at the bottom of your screen is a little icon that says Q&A. Simply type your questions into that, and it looks like we're going to have some time at the end to hopefully be able to answer some of your questions. So each panelist is going to get about 10 minutes. We'll follow the order in the program, and you won't be hearing from me again really until the end, though I will be giving the panelists some time warnings. So I think we'd like to start by inviting Sharon and Nayan up to the floor to give their presentation. So Sharon? All right, okay.
Thank you for having us. So I'm Nayan Ramirez. I'm an assistant professor at Cal State Northridge, and Sharon Villalobos is one of our great undergraduate students here. She's a double major in psychology and criminology and justice studies. And this is inspired by some of her, something that she wanted to pursue earlier in the year, and we've sort of slowly ticked away at it during these COVID times. So I'll let Sharon introduce the title, and then we'll get into the background.
So this is our research, adolescents fending for themselves, the role of mental health conditions on weapon carrying. Sorry, I went to Dr. Ramirez to pursue this study, and I'm very excited to share the results with you. Prior research indicates that general strain theory examines negative social relations and emotional state to predict crime. Youth experiencing community and interpersonal violence undergo strains during their lifetime, potentially leading to aggressive behaviors such as weapon carrying. Social isolation and exposure to violence play a role in general strain theory. Socially withdrawn youth who experience violent victimization have demonstrated increased risk for violence and victimization. Furthermore, depressive symptoms and gun carrying is tied to school attachment. Students with higher levels of school attachment present fewer depressive symptoms. Intrinsic factors involving mental health and impulsivity plus an extrinsic factor of exposure to violence can lead to weapon carrying at school. Weapon carrying behaviors are increased with prior experiences of trauma and victimization. The likelihood for weapon carrying is increased if youth are involved in polysubstance use and gang fighting. In addition, weapon carrying is linked to emotional health problems such as feeling low, irritability, bad temper, and feeling nervous in youth. Prior research has explored the reasons for why youth may carry a weapon. One of the reasons is the fear and victimization hypothesis, which suggests that fear related to victimization motivates youth to carry a weapon to feel safer. However, weapon carrying has also been linked to bullying and antisocial behavior. For our current study, we examine how do depression and anxiety impact adolescents' weapon carrying behavior over time. We predict both will result in a higher likelihood of carrying a weapon. Do prior mental health conditions and weapon carrying exacerbate future depression and anxiety symptoms? We predict that future mental health conditions will be exacerbated when youth have prior mental health conditions and carry a weapon.
Alrighty, so moving on to the data and methods, we're using the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, which is known as AdHealth. It's a nationally representative sample of adolescents who were first sampled in 1994 to 1995 when they were in grades 7 through 12. The reason we chose AdHealth is because it includes a good deal of questions related to weapon carrying and as well as mental health conditions, including depressive and anxiety symptoms, not just through the course of adolescence, but through adulthood too. So there's the possibility to look at this over time. We're specifically utilizing logistic regression to examine how weapon carrying is affected by mental health conditions, specifically depression and anxiety. And then, like Sharon mentioned, to see whether those two interact to exacerbate the future mental health conditions of these youth. So our measures include, they're very simple. It's sort of a straightforward analysis. Weapon carrying, we looked at wave 2. So we leveraged the 2 waves of ad health. The first 2 waves are collected when the youth are adolescents, approximately 6 months apart, which makes it easier for us to be able to sort of examine the effect of mental health conditions on weapon carrying, and by taking into account the temporal ordering as well. So with weapon carrying, we used a measure that looked at weapon carrying since wave 1, so the period between, say, wave 1 and wave 2, simple logistic dichotomous measure, 0, 1 being yes. For anxiety, we used a scale used in prior research that looks at anxiety symptoms, because there isn't an anxiety diagnosis necessarily in ad health. So we combined the following measures: feeling hot, having cold sweats, getting chest pains, fearfulness, getting a stomach ache, and trouble relaxing, which gave us about an alpha of 0.47, which is a little low, but still was good enough for what we were trying to do. Depression didn't have as many sort of symptoms included in the survey, so we used a simple dichotomous measure in the last week: how often did you feel depressed? And that we combined from 0 to 0 equaled never to rarely, and then 1 was occasionally, often, and every day, to sort of take into account not just an individual who may be depressed here and there, but actually more consistent sort of issues with these mental health conditions. All right, so I'm going to move to the results. We tried to make them more sort of graphic based, so that they'd be a little bit easier to understand. Nobody wants to look at tables all day. So the first question we looked at was, do mental health conditions predict weapon carrying at wave 2? So in this figure, we're looking at the odds of carrying a weapon based on whether they were the individual was depressed or anxious at wave 1, or before wave 2, I should say. So if an individual was depressed, they were about 17% more likely to carry a weapon at wave 2. And again, we have a pretty robust sample size using Ad Health. We're about 15,000 individuals. And then for anxiety, it was also significant, and about the similar sort of percentage. You were about 18% more likely to carry a weapon if you had that sort of constellation of anxiety symptoms. For figure 2, we looked at whether mental health conditions and weapon carrying, sort of the interaction between these 2 variables, predict future depression, or whether they predict that it's going to be sort of still as depressed, or whether it's going to get worse. Unsurprisingly, both anxiety and depression are highly predictive of future mental health conditions. That's pretty well known, right? Prior behavior, prior conditions are predictive of future conditions, with anxiety leading to an increase of about 68% for depression at wave 2, and depression having a very dramatic sort of odds ratio there, about 322% more likely to be depressed at wave 2. When we looked at the interaction between these variables, there was no significant interaction between anxiety and weapon carrying. However, there was a sort of interesting interaction between depression and weapon carrying, with individuals who were depressed and who carried a weapon before wave 1 being more likely to be less depressed at wave 2. So they had about 28% lower odds of having of being depressed at wave 2, which sort of feeds into the fear and victimization hypothesis that suggests that individuals may be carrying a weapon because that's a form of coping, that's a form of protection, of feeling safer. So they're actually feeling potentially safer and less depressed by carrying a weapon. The last sort of main set of results was the same, sort of similar to the last slide, but here we're predicting anxiety instead of depression. So we're using the variables again to see whether individuals were more likely to be depressed. Anxiety, like in the last slide, was the most predictive variable, about 220% higher odds of anxiety at wave 2. Depression, of course, also predictive of anxiety, although lower than anxiety itself. However, for this one, we did not find a significant interaction between anxiety and weapon carrying, and depression and weapon carrying, on sort of exacerbating future anxiety. So a little different from the depression findings, where we saw that reduction in depression at wave 2 when someone carried a weapon. It doesn't seem to be doing anything really to anxiety. Sort of summarize our main set of results, we found evidence that both anxiety and depression predict future weapon carrying behavior. Depression and weapon carrying interacted to predict lower depression at wave 2, which sort of supports that fear and victimization hypothesis. However, we didn't really look at the antisocial bullying hypothesis because we didn't take into account the youth's delinquency in these analyses. In addition, there were no significant interactions between mental health conditions and weapon carrying on individuals' future anxiety or weapon carrying. Some additional analysis that we ran but we did not present were looking whether there was a difference between male and female respondents in the study, and we found no differences. The only main thing that popped up was, unsurprisingly, that boys were more likely to carry a weapon than girls. I'll let Sharon take over our conclusion.
For a conclusion, it remains important to pay attention to the role of mental health symptoms and their effect on weapon carrying behavior during adolescence. In the future, we plan to explore gender, sexuality differences, socioeconomic status differences, and differences related to social support.
And like we mentioned, we want to also take into account sort of the alternative hypothesis that perhaps a lot of this weapon carrying behavior is being driven by kids that are already delinquent or antisocial. So there's lots of avenues to pursue this in the future, and especially for someone who's Sharon, who wants to go on to grad school. Thank you so much for having us. Here's our contact information if you have any questions, or you can ask them in the chat. And thank you to CrimCon for sponsoring this in these crazy times.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. If you would unshare your screen, and we're going to invite Lacee up to share her screen and give her presentation. And once you're set, Lacee, I'll start your clock.
Okay, just 1 second. Oops. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Lacee Pappas. I'm a 4th-year doctoral candidate at the University of California, Irvine, and I'm really excited to be here to share some of the work that I've been doing as part of my PhD program on, on a meta review for juvenile offenders on what works in terms of correctional programming. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to delve too much into the background on the what works literature, but imagine that you're a young person who's made a mistake. You've broken the law, you've committed a crime, and now you have to pay your dues to society for that crime. But as a result of this mistake, you've been tossed aside by society and told that there's really no hope for you to change your delinquent behavior because once a criminal, always a criminal. But today, I'm going to show you why this is a false belief and why we shouldn't give up hope on our young people, regardless of the decisions that they might make. Rehabilitation programs have been hotly debated in the public sphere and continue to be debated today. This 40-year what works debate on what works for rehabilitating juvenile offenders and reducing their reoffending has left 2 major camps on how we both punish and correct these juvenile offenders. The first camp being the child-saving rehabilitative model, and the second camp being the punitive lock-'em-up model. Because of the decades of research on this topic, there's a large body of research that currently exists, a lot of which have competing findings. So there's a need to synthesize all of this information across this body of research and then to reconcile the differences that might present in the findings. But most importantly, there's a need to provide all the stakeholders involved, like the policymakers, practitioners, law enforcement, and even the juvenile offenders themselves, with the most updated and accurate information on all of these interventions available, and to be able to really identify what works to be able to reduce recidivism. So for this particular project, I've been exploring this broad research question of what actually works for juvenile offenders to reduce their return to reoffending. And the best way to answer this question is by using a method called a meta review. And a meta-review is similar to a traditional meta-analysis in that it's a way of statistically combining study outcomes in the form of an effect size. And this involves two main components. First, integration, and then reconciliation. So integrating all of the findings across the entire body of literature, and then reconciling the variation that might be present in the findings. And while the methodological approach to a meta-review is similar to a traditional meta-analysis, the difference actually lies in the unit of analysis. So for example, in a primary study, the unit is a participant. In a meta-analysis or a systematic review, the unit of analysis is a primary study, but in a meta-review, the unit of analysis is now a meta-analysis or a systematic review. So when I say the word review, just for simplicity during this presentation, I'm referring to the units of analysis for this study, which are meta-analyses and systematic reviews. So adopting that same methodological approach that you might see common in a traditional systematic review or meta-analysis, I adopted 3 strategies in order to gather the reviews used for the analyses for the study. So first, I conducted an electronic database search using pre-specified search terms in order to search the electronic databases. Second, I contacted known researchers in the field, authors that had conducted at least 2 meta-analyses in the field to be able to reach out for any reviews that might have been in the pipeline for publication or never actually made it to publication in the first place. And then 3, I hand searched the reference list of relevant texts as well as conference websites for any abstracts there. Reviews were screened, their abstracts were first screened, and then any that met the inclusion criteria were retained for full text screening, paying particular attention to the methods and results sections along pre-specified inclusion and exclusion criteria. Those that met that inclusion criteria were then retained for data extraction. And in total, 53 meta-analyses and systematic reviews were included into this set of analyses, and a total of 80 effect sizes were deemed relevant to be used for the following findings. So on average, across a wide range of intervention programs, there is a significant reduction in recidivism, and there's a difference between those who participate in a program and those who do not, and that difference is about 17.4%. And so this overall finding suggests that on average, there is an association with a reduction in recidivism for juvenile offenders who participate in a program compared to those who do not. But great, this means that on average, they work, but we have to explore the variation within it. And in this case, there's actually a significant amount of variation around the summary effect. And so that means that these programs do in fact work in different ways for different groups of people. So to explore that difference today, I'll be focusing on how the effects of these programs vary as a function of the type of offender as part of these analyses. And so I'll be focusing today on sexual offenders, serious offenders, non-serious offenders, and drug offenders. So for sexual offenders who participate in a program, we actually see the strongest association with the reduction in recidivism at 34%. The next strongest association is actually for serious offenders with a 28% reduction in recidivism for serious offenders who participate in a program compared to those who do not. Followed by non-serious offenders with a 14% reduction in recidivism. And then lastly, we see the weakest effects or the weakest association with the reduction in recidivism for drug offenders at about 6% compared to drug offenders who do not participate in a program. So it might be a little bit counterintuitive to see that sexual offenders and serious offenders have the strongest associations with the reduction in recidivism compared to non-serious and drug offenders, but this actually makes a lot of sense theoretically. So you might expect that those juveniles who commit less serious crimes might actually be able to improve their behavior or be more likely to change their behavior as a result of a program, because the less serious nature of their crime would be easy to change if caught early. And that's one reason why we do actually see significant reductions in recidivism, although the strength of that effect is much smaller than sexual and serious offenders. However, sexual and serious offenders actually have the most room for improvement in their behavior because the programs that are designed and targeted in the legal system are actually designed to be evidence-based, and they're designed to target the risks and needs of offenders, particularly focusing on those who are committing sexual or serious or violent crimes. And so as such, the programs that are used with these higher risk groups of offenders are actually better developed, there's more research on them, and they're more equipped to target that behavior change. And they're more equipped to do that better than the programs for non-serious or drug offenders, which might be some reason why we see some magnitude or some big difference in the magnitude of the effect there between the more serious offenders and then the less serious offenders. It is important to note, however, that all of these programs, or at least in this particular set of analyses I'm presenting here today, do reduce recidivism for all of those groups at a statistically significant level, meaning that the programs should continue to be implemented for all of these groups. The results provide evidence to suggest that these programs are a really important part of sentencing for youth and should be included in legislation regarding youth involvement in the system. Of course, decision makers should account for other factors that might attribute to the difference in these effects, factors which I didn't discuss here today, but are part of this research more broadly. Moving forward, we have to consider that there are other measures for success besides recidivism, and we need to move towards a more holistic approach to offender reintegration and offender rehabilitation, an approach that considers more of the context in which those juvenile offenders will be reintegrating into once they're done with their sentence. But most importantly, we need to stop continually punishing youth once their sentence is over and actually create pathways for them to be involved in the system or be involved in society rather than pushing or creating more barriers to prevent them from actually being successful. We can now confidently say that doing something is better than actually doing nothing, and that we shouldn't give up hope on our young people, regardless of the decisions that they make and regardless if they violate the law. Thank you so much. This is my contact information. Please feel free to email me or answer or ask any questions in the chat box. And again, thank you to CrimCon for having me here today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lacey. Nice job. If you would unshare your screen, please. We are going to invite Adrian and Maritza for their presentation. And let me know when you guys are ready to rock and roll here.
I think we're almost ready. Just definitely feels like my heart's going to come out of my chest. But, you know, those are just regular conference nerves, right? For everybody.
It's cool. You're just being broadcast. So don't worry about it.
It's not a big deal. Not a big deal.
All right. Good luck.
First time. All right. Thank you so much. So definitely appreciate the opportunity to be here to share this research with you. My name is Dr. Adrian Huerta. I'm an assistant professor of education at the USC Rossier School of Ed. My colleague Maritza Salazar is a first-year PhD student in the higher ed program at USC. So today we're going to be sharing a qualitative study that looks at the college and career aspirations for gang-associated youth. This is a multi-site case study. Next slide, please. Sorry, my plug just came in. So what we know about gang youth is that often the literature on gang youth focuses on why youth join gangs, the victimization that they experience, the multiple levels of marginalization in throughout multiple ecosystems. Pyrus really was one of the first to give us an understanding using national data to see that 30%, the gang youth are 30% less likely to graduate from high school, are much less likely to earn a four-year degree. And the work that I've been publishing recently is finding that the gang youth do want to go on to higher ed, but are often stuck in schools and interacting with school counselors that don't want to give them that information. And with Lacee's presentation, you know, I think she really signaled and highlighted that once students are marked by a system, that often it's on educators and other supporting individuals to kind of guide them to a different and positive path. So, and that's really at the core of like, you know, what we're trying to understand and left wondering, like, do gang youth, what do they want to do with their futures and what are they hoping for? And to understand that, Oysterman and Marcus or Oysterman specifically for the last 30 years has really been advancing possible selves, and really has given us, study after study after study that she's produced finds that youth that are, labeled delinquent or justice involved, do aspire for something different in the future, but the critical or key linchpin in their movement towards positive movement is counselors and caring adults. They are often that linchpin for change. So youth can aspire for all these great things in the future, but if they don't get that support, they don't get that buy-in from schools or others, then they digress back to other behaviors that are more, we'll just say, like destructive. Next slide, please. So this work is based on an ethnography over 2 academic school years, where I was in 3 alternative or continuation schools. Often these are schools for students who have been removed either voluntarily or involuntarily for behavioral issues, academic issues, or truancy issues. This work is focusing on 41 gang-associated Latino boys that are middle school and high school aged. I conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews, participant observations, and a bunch of other things, including 500 hours of observations. With the work that Maritza and I are sharing with you today, where this was multiple cycles of coding and online coding and analysis to really get a clear picture of what's happening with students. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Adrian. So now I'll kind of go over the educational and career aspirations that the young boys in the study shared. I'll start off with educational aspirations, then go on to career aspirations. This is one of the quotes from Javier, who attended WBS, which is an acronym synonym for one of the continuation schools. And when analyzing a lot of the data on educational aspirations and career aspirations, we noticed that for some of the boys, their pathways into either college or career was sometimes based off like getting a scholarship to school and then going off to play pro sports like Javier. So as y'all can see in bold, he says, I'll go to college for basketball or something. And he also acknowledges his mom and talks about how when she drops him off to school, she is a source of encouragement, and she tells him, if you do good in school, big things will come for you. And so in addition to these youth having to navigate, their school system and having to identify their educational and career aspirations, there's also these interpersonal interactions they're having with family members in their community who are shaping these aspirations or hindering those aspirations at some times too. When some students shared, interactions they had with teachers or other school personnel who weren't as supportive of their career and educational aspirations. Some students had identified multiple pathways. So for example, Javier talks about him playing football before basketball. So he kind of weighs his options and says, well, I'm good at football and basketball, so maybe I'll go into basketball or maybe football. I'll kind of just, see where it goes. I don't know between those two. So that's just one example of students kind of finding ways to make it into college through sports. Some other quotes that we pulled were regarding students who wanted to become architects. So some students understood that they needed to go to college to have a certain career, whereas others weren't really aware of that certain college information. So for Johnny, he identifies that he needs to have a certain degree to be able to become an architect, and he specifically emphasizes being good at math to be able to do, that as a career. And then towards the bottom quote, when George was asked, do you want to go to college then? George says, of course, hell yeah, hell yeah. So these kids, again, do have aspirations to attend college and post-secondary opportunities. But sometimes, again, they kind of just need the scaffolding or they need the appropriate information to be able to navigate that process.
And can I just throw in one quick fact for both, or 2 quick facts for both of these students? So Johnny scored really high on various state exams. So like he had already passed his state proficiency test and, and had decent grades, not the best grades, but he still wanted to do stuff and still didn't get support. And George he acknowledged that he was like, I'm really smart, but I can't get into this college access program because they only accept students that are in the Gates and honors classes. So again, like they're expressing that interest to want to do something, but then, systems within the school prevent opportunities for them to get involved in special programs because of the mark of being, delinquent or gang associated or a behavioral problem.
Thank you, Adrian. There were also some youth who were leveraging some of their fast food restaurant positions to be able to receive information about college. So then there's one young boy in the study who talks about asking folks in the drive-through like questions about college when he'd see a backpack in their car. So a lot of things that they had to navigate and take advantage of. So now kind of going to the career aspirations. Gabe here talks about pursuing a career in video game design. He talks about how it appeals to him, but he also, attaches this idea of how it was a good escape from what was going on. So he started messing around with tutorials and beginner programs and then started programming stuff. So in addition to the youth's educational aspirations in terms of, how their community and their family life shaped them, Gabe kind of highlights that as well, and how the environment at home was kind of what pushing him towards video games and how that eventually shapes his aspirations for being a video game designer.
Yeah, and Gabe was also part of like a federal like college access initiative, and was a Gates honor student. But once he got in trouble and got sent to the continuation school, they don't offer differentiated curriculum. So everyone is in Algebra A or Algebra 1, and then that's just what people do. Even if they were in advanced courses, like that's just what the teachers teach. And then these schools also don't offer any type of federal or local like support programs focused on college access either.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. You have 2 minutes left.
Okay, so this is just an overview, quantifying the college aspirations and career aspirations. So 30 out of 41 of the youth were able to express that they had aspirations to attend college. Some were a little bit more aware of the type of institution they wanted to attend. A majority didn't have that information. And when it came to career aspirations, 38 out of the 41 youth were able to identify at least one career path. The two most common were the careers in the automotive field and professional sports. And then culinary arts was the third most common one, with 6 of the boys suggesting that they wanted to pursue a career in culinary arts.
So in thinking about like what do we do with this is often with the literature in criminology and sociology and other behavioral sciences, we kind of focus on the missing variables, or really just kind of like focus on what families are missing or what youth are missing. And often we kind of don't flip that around to focus on what the youth do have and the assets they do possess and the aspirations that they do hold for the future. So we're really hoping that this paper will help us to to complicate the ideas of what gang youth want to do and showcase that, look, they are thinking about their futures of what is possible for themselves, but then also acknowledge that school systems aren't providing the scaffolding or tailored resources to the kids that often need it the most. And especially in urban schools, it's typically the students with 3.0s or 3.5s and above, but a lot of these students are saying, I want a certificate, a degree, something for social mobility, but we're not capturing them and helping them move on to those next steps.
And that's all we got. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks to the both of you. If you would unshare your screen, we have one more panelist left. Daniel, if you'd like to start sharing your screen. Daniel. Okay. And when you're ready, I'll start your clock, Daniel.
Sorry, I'm just getting my screen share here. It's not something. Do you see my PowerPoint, or do you just see me?
I can see your PowerPoint. It's not in the presentation mode, but I can see your PowerPoint just fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I just how's that?
You might want to switch your display settings because I see presenter mode right
Oh,
now.
of course. I'm not sure why it's doing that because it's not giving me the option to flip. So display. There we go. Sorry. How's that better?
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I am excited about this talk. My name is Daniel Jones. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Huddersfield. I'm also a serving police officer in Canada, in Edmonton, Alberta, and I've been doing that for 23 years. Before I go into the main presentation, the one thing I want to talk about is why this research is important, specifically to me. I was in charge of our victim services area at one point in time, and a case came, and it's a relatively famous Canadian case, and it started in Alberta with an accused man named Gordon Domney, who sexually assaulted at least 13 young men in a youth facility in the 80s. This didn't come to light until sometime in the early 2000s. And when this came to light, a lot of the young men who had been sexually assaulted by Mr. Domney were involved in criminal lifestyles. One of them went home. I knew him quite well. He went home right after he provided his statement and killed himself. And when court came, 5 of these individuals were incarcerated in a remand facility. And when I asked my victim services people to go see them and give them some support, they refused and said that they serve victims, not criminals. So that pushed me into doing research on the victim offender overlap. This research is part of a greater project called the University of Alberta Prison Project. And we've conducted in-depth interviews with 800 inmates, 200 staff inside 4 provincial and 2 federal prisons in Western Canada from 2016 to 2020. Just a little bit of background in Canadian prison populations. Roughly every day we have 40,000 individuals incarcerated in our country. 23,000 in federal, which is 2 years plus a day. Provincial system is 2 years less a day. We have roughly 22,000 and 10,000 sentenced and 12,000 remanded. When we start interviewing these individuals, these people, you start seeing that there's a lot of nuance and unsettling reality about the impact of trauma in their lives. What we found was when it comes to victimization, and victimization here, what we're talking about is sexual or violent victimization. 95% of men and 97% of women experience victimization in their lives. And I make the second point because oftentimes when I make this point in certain audiences, I get the answer, well, they're involved in a criminal lifestyle, so of course they're going to have experienced victimization. But I go to the 82% of men and 83% of women experienced first victimization prior to their first detected offense. There are staggering numbers of victimization and horrific stories of victimization, and I do have quotes here from some of our participants, and I will apologize in advance if they're upsetting. Family members molested me and my daughter is from incest, and I used to get raped by other people that would come into our house. And by the time I was 16, I was sold into relationships with other people. An ex tried killing me, so I left him. When I told him we were never getting back together, he snapped and started strangling me and then chased me with a fucking machete out of my house until the police came. I went to start dating him and kept going back because it was him or homeless. I don't know. I know how to be in an abusive relationship. I don't know how to be homeless. I lost who I was. And so being in here, like, I don't know, jail kind of saved me, because if it wasn't in jail right now, I would probably still be getting high and still be in that abusive relationship. Like, I'm actually kind of glad I'm in here right now. Now, the victimization was presented by these individuals as literally inescapable, matter-of-fact part of their lives. Not one of our participants tried to excuse criminal behavior. They presented their victimization stories as matter-of-fact aspects. Most of them had the worldview, I did the crime and I do the time. What I found very interesting about that is a lot of our participants, as I said, were victimized prior to their first detected offense, but somehow they conflate their being incarcerated or their criminality with the expectation that they should have been victimized and they somehow deserved it. I think that's a failure of our system at times, and understanding who the justice client is. When you look at housing, 73% of the women and 43% of the men on our federal sample have been homeless at some point in time in their lives. Another quote, before I got arrested this last time, I wanted to come back to jail because I didn't have a house, I didn't have a shelter, I didn't know when I was going to eat, I didn't know where I was going to shower. 80% of all men and women in the sample report using drugs, and drugs are considered anything psychoactive and illegal. This doesn't include marijuana, as marijuana is legal in this country. And 49% of all men and women report using drugs inside of prison. I think this is an important point, and we heard this over and over again. Sometimes we have to use crystal meth to stay up. You have to do the drugs to stay up because you can't fall asleep in the streets. You'll get raped. You know what I mean? The guys would take advantage of you or something. It's a bit of a relief coming to jail. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about making more jails and that jails are a good place. But what I am talking about is in systems, we need to change the conversation. This is not about drugs, choices, or crime. It's about ACEs, trauma, what I call symptomatic criminality and pain. We need to start by changing how we as system actors interact. I struggle at times being part of a system that sometimes that I obviously think needs some fixing, but I also believe that I from inside I may be able to do some change. We need to start actually partnering police, public health, and education and fire emergency medical service to truly be trauma aware and trauma informed. It's an important aspect of what we do, and understanding who the justice client is for justice actors is incredibly important. And that's not just the police, that's Crown prosecutors or district attorneys, that's medical field, that's judges and lawyers, both defense and prosecutions. If we were selling cars, we knew who buys our cars. If we worked for a sporting place like Nike, we knew who buys our products. But for some reason, we teach the police and we teach justice actors about law, and we don't teach them about crime. We don't teach them about social determinants of crime, and we don't teach them about the individual who they are going to interact with and how we need to start with compassion. This is a quote I really like. What would have taken me on a different path from violence and crime if I had the love I needed, if I had the care I needed, if I had the attention I needed? Finding does not mean more in prison. I can't make that more clear. It means trauma-informed justice. It means trauma-informed healthcare. It means trauma-informed education. And it means compassion from systems actors. What isn't behind all of this is a vast backdrop of systemic and institutional failures, and I will also say systemic bias and racism from multiple systems, including justice. There's a lack of stable housing. There is a lack of personal security. There's a lack of services to manage addictions, a lack of services to address mental health issues, and difficulties in obtaining medical care for individuals who are involved in these lifestyles. Early on in my career, I learned something from a woman who I still maintain contact with, and it was another one of the motivators for the research I did.
Daniel, I'm sorry to interrupt. You have 2 minutes left.
Yes, sir. I was walking a foot patrol in the area of in 118th Avenue, which is a place where I walked my foot patrol. And I was going down an alley and I found a young woman in the garbage, thrown away, raped and brutally beat. I spent the day with her at the hospital. I never solved the crime. And later in my, 3 weeks later, I get a handwritten letter from my mom thanking me for treating her like a human being. At a moment, I thought, well, that's really nice. And then I started to think, how many times have we as systems actors not treated her like a human being? So it's time for us to step up and treat people as humans with compassion. Here's my contact information. Thank you for listening, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks to CrimCon for putting this on.
Thanks, Daniel. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists as well as our attendees. I don't see any questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So unless there are any other comments or questions anybody would like to make. Okay, great. So just some housekeeping things here before we end this up. we have another panel coming up in about 15 minutes on this stream, but just for the just the way we're running things, we're kicking everybody out of the room once I end this. So if you are presenting or would like to attend the 12 p.m. panel, please rejoin in about 15 minutes. I want to thank everybody for their time. I especially want to thank the panelists for their work. This has been a great experience this week, and I appreciate everyone being here. So thank you. Be happy, be healthy, and I will see you soon. Take care.
Can I ask Daniel a question?
Oh, yeah, sure. We got about 2 minutes there, Adrian.
Oh, sorry. Daniel, so like one of the things that you brought up was about like compassion, right? And like, so what are things that I guess police departments can do to kind of like, I guess, start deprogramming people?
That's it. You know what? That's a great question. One of the things that we started to do here, and we're starting to find ways to measure it, is what we've done is we've actually taken the data that we have from our research and have developed into trauma-informed training. We've also developed a compassion series, which has people with lived experiences talking on our internal systems. We also mix that with our trauma-informed training in with an understanding of who the justice client is a big part of it, procedural justice and procedural fairness, and the impact of police legitimacy. So we've started doing that training internally from our organization. I also sit on the research advisory committee for the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and also on the research committee for the Global Law Enforcement Public Health Association. And we're trying to bring that into the world of policing a little bit stronger and a little bit more to try to change the way, the way police interact, and trying to move away from that law enforcement mentality more to a community safety and well-being mentality where police are part of a public health response, and we don't over-criminalize our certain populations that don't need to be over-criminalized, and we get people off-ramped into the places they need to go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
On Twitter too.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you to everyone for attending. I hope you've enjoyed CrimCon 2020. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate you putting your faith in us as an upstart conference. I hope you've enjoyed, and I know I have, and I will see everybody soon. So have a nice day, everyone.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.